So Sharkey is first up. Sharkey's going to be talking about the capacity of the body in queer performance.
Yes. Let's do it like that. How do I get my... Oh, it's there.
Press that.
Okay.
Or you can press that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okie dokie. Do I need to press anything on this? Is it okay? The mic. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharkey Elliot, and I'm a conceptual performance artist and movement researcher. My independent research project is titled The Capacity of the Body in Queer Performance. This article explores durational performance through the reading and comparison of queer performance artists Casillas and Miles Greenberg, who, like myself, use their body as their medium. This article investigates the queer body and its capacity within durational performance to act as a political stance and invite encounters with otherness, and offer new engagements between spectating bodies and performing bodies. This is Casillas, and I was specifically referencing their performances, Cuts, a traditional sculpture, and Becoming an Image. Casillas and Miles Greenberg invite the viewer to contemplate the body as living sculpture, yet both serve different objectives within their practices. Casillas, citing feminist performance documents from the 1970s, bring forth the history of feminist discussion whilst reenacting the tropes of these works as a trans body, pushing the boundaries of these conversations further. Miles Greenberg is driven by creating new realities, where the relationship between movement and time are transformed, centering the romanticized black body in space through durational performance, sculptural forms, and gestures. Both artists research and explore the effects of temporal duration on the physical body. In 2011, Casillas carried out durational performance Cuts, a traditional sculpture, where over the course of 23 weeks, the artist employed intensive bodybuilding to sculpt a traditional masculine form. This work cites Eleanor Antin's 1972 performance, Carving, a traditional sculpture, which functioned as a feminist critique of the social pressures to make bodies conform to an aesthetic, binary-gendered cultural ideal. Antin documented in time-lapse photography her body during the course of a 45-day-long crash diet. She references Greek sculptural techniques of removing unnecessary layers of marble to find the ideal form, by carving away her own body to reach the feminine ideal aesthetic form of thinness. Casillas inverts this process by instead building the ideal muscular masculine form through intensive bodybuilding, which, like Antin's starving of the body, is an unsustainable and temporary living sculpture. Casillas borrows the violent tone of Antin's Carving in their title Cuts, in reference to the contemporary transitioned embodiment being defined through gender-conforming surgery, where trans embodiment is accomplished through a sex change. Both artists highlight the temporality of the materiality of the body, which shrinks or grows to become gendered ideals. Casillas' building of a beefcake trans-masculine form places a queerly sculpted body within the frame of this performance document, presenting an abject and confounding body, not a socially accepted body. These new interpretations will cause a rupture in the mind of the viewer, bringing forth the history of feminine discussion, but also pushing it further. Casillas builds this body to maximum capacity through a practice that is dangerous and ferocious, a calculated risk in the face of the material's capacity, suggesting a productive mode of violence where the body's strength juxtaposes with its decomposition. Casillas' follow-up durational performance, Becoming an Image, was presented 1 year after Cuts, a traditional sculpture. In this durational performance, the audience circles the edge of a room in complete darkness, whilst Casillas attacks a ton block of clay with punches and kicks. Throughout this attack, the flash of a photographer illuminates the action, burning a snapshot of the brutality onto the viewer's retina. The photographic flash in the audience's eyes summons up an abstract image of violence. Casillas explains the performance highlights the fact that genderqueer and trans people are 28% more likely to experience violence, with the darkened room representative of the everyday violence trans people suffer in silence, to the violent photographic flashes signifying transphobic violence. Studies into transgender trauma have found that in addition to institutionalized discrimination, trans individuals experience an extensive measure of gender-biased microaggressions and traumatic life events, such as rape or domestic violence. These findings integrate with facts and statistics which marks trans lives with trauma and the anticipation of the threat of violence, a process cultural theorist Lauren Berlant qualifies as a slow death, a physical wearing out of the population in which mental and physical suffering seeps into everyday environment rather than being confined only to sporadic events. Berlant argues that in the scene of a slow death, a condition of being worn out by the activity of reproducing life, agency can be the maintenance, not making. The critical attention we bestow when reading Cassill's work offers a queer commentary that cultural theorists Lauren Berlant and Michael Warner advocated for when queer theory first transpired. They stated that if queer commentary and aesthetic genre in queer commentary, an aesthetic genre that spawns discussion of violence, death, and neglect are to be celebrated for anything, they argue that it's for holding an abstract space that brings a culture into being. Queer and trans culture are emerging today with resilient courage in the face of the rollback of rights found in the UK and USA, targeting specifically young trans people and people of colour. Cassill's employs extremes onto their transgendered body to heighten visibility of transgendered representation and bring forth a cultural conversation about trans and gender non-conforming bodies. We have seen a shift in our culture in the past decade where transgender representation has evolved. However, this heightened visibility is coupled with heightened violence. Cassill's comments on this issue by expressing, "When I say that there's been an evolution in terms of genealogy of the vernacular, that is true. When I say that there has been a proliferation of trans representation in the media, that is true. I do not say that these two things determine legislative and political agency. To be given visual and cultural currency does not equate to civil rights." Cassill's uses their body's capacity and material to challenge these issues within their work, stating that, "My work plays with the concept of visibility. I was interested in the material of the body as something to work with and to posit this notion that my body wasn't the problem, society was the problem." Society produces a hierarchy of value in which certain bodies are positioned as objectively more valuable than others, which leads me to question, what makes a body valuable? Feminist theorist E. Hella Toscanas' reading of Karl Marx provokes her to ask after ways in which the body is formalized in and evaluated by the process of capital. She claims labor invented the body. This is not to deny that the body existed before wage labor, but rather to turn our attention to the process by which capitalist production's fundamental requirements of living labor and the status of surplus labor as creator of value simultaneously produces and presupposes a now dominant epistemology of the body, an instrumental account which understands the body as a site of and container for a discrete and quantifiable amount of capricious action. Instead of perceiving cut as a durational representation of a body's gendering, Toscanos suggests that the work enables an understanding of gender as the cultivation of material capacity that is made, unmade, and remade in perpetuality. Cassill's questions in their work whether there is a way of performative playing with the body as a way to assert this ridiculous construction of gender. Cassill's builds their body not to achieve a legible product or end result, but by pushing their body to maximum capacity, suggests that the body coheres only to fall apart, exhausted by capital in the production and consumption cycle. Cassill's aims to pass apart this notion of something feeling fixed and to showcase the fact that there is a process of consumption under this capitalist mode that needs to be considered when we are thinking about notions like being born this way or an eternal sort of blossoming. I have discussed Cassill's use of limits and extremes of the body's material capacity within durational performance to act within a political sphere of queer representation and violence. I will now introduce Miles Greenberg, a queer black performance artist whose work consists of captivating durational performance within sensorily immersive environments revolving around the physical body in space as a mean to achieve transcendental mental states. Greenberg's durational performances are visceral and immediate, driven by fascination with temporality of the body, inspired by video games' stimulating environments and the calmness and solitude found in nature. Greenberg uses performance as a tool to create new realities, inviting the audience into a space where the relationship between movement and time are transformed. His creative vision is driven by instinct, intellectual curiosity, and a drive to explore the limits of the body and mind. His work, like Cassell's, includes acts of intense mental focus and athleticism, executed with total commitment and stoicism. In affinity with Cassell's Cuts, A Living Sculpture, Greenberg takes an architectural approach to the body, provoking the viewer to contemplate the body as living sculpture. He states, "Flesh and blood are a sculptural medium just as much as marble. The only difference is how time acts on them." His performative scenes evoke a sense of vulnerability as ritual, encouraging his audience to tap into their own sensibilities more profoundly. He says, "I want the audience to be sensitive to the changes in themselves and to witness the microscopic details, movements of serendipity and intrigue and poetry that occur naturally in the world around us." Unlike Cassell's, Greenberg's work is less about challenging the audience and himself and more about curiosity and potential, while centering the romanticized black body in space. All performing bodies in the work are black bodies. He says, "I wanted the black body to be considered as integral and as symbolic and universally symbolic of humanity as the white body. You have to adapt your perspective and your view of yourself through a black body as opposed to when I'm in a gallery space and I'm witnessing white bodies and needing to adapt to it." He frequently employs the convention of blinding himself, using white contacts to create a psychological boundary between himself and the audience. If you erase the eyes, the whole body becomes a shape, whereas if you reveal them, you're looking into who is inside that body. Greenberg employs this distance between performing and spectating bodies to allow for a more direct engagement. He says, "It was always the fact of being a young black artist who wanted to engage beyond direct or literal narratives of oppression. I can talk about racial injustice and social justice, but I don't think that should be my imperative. I think that there's something very prescribed about what the black body has to mean in certain spaces, and I guess that I've always wanted to live beyond that prescription." For a comparative reading of Cassell's and Greenberg's approaches, I consider Greenberg's 2020 durational performance, Oyster Knife. In Oyster Knife, the artist walks in a straight line on a conveyor belt for 24 hours continuously. No breaks were permitted for any reason, with the exception of a 23-minute loss of consciousness at hour 18. The walk was resumed and immediately thereafter. Greenberg pushes past the limits of his body's capacity to achieve a state of true inner silence. Cassell's pushes their body's capacity through profound acts of consumption, combined with the exertion of maxing out in pursuit for an unsustainable gendered body image, locating the point of their maximum capacity in effort to confront notions of gendered ideals and present visibilities for trans body. Greenberg not only locates this point, but breaks through this boundary to achieve a transcendent mental state. In a retelling of this experience, Greenberg says, "I think the most shocking thing to me was the absolute desolation I felt upon reaching hour 18, where I was met with the at first horrifying, then joyful, then euphoric realization that I didn't have a single thought left in my mind that I cared to solicit. By hour 22, that state had finally set in. The pain totally disintegrated, and I think I experienced, for the first time, true inner silence. From there, I started to dance. All at once, my subconscious had full reign over my motor cortex, and everything became involuntary. It just came forth." Oyster Knife is Greenberg's homage to the performance art of the 1970s, specifically to the great black pioneers of endurance, such as Senga Ngudi, Pope L, and David Hammonds. Greenberg asserts that endurance work necessarily involves a degree of spectacle around bodily deterioration. This spectacle is also found within Cassill's work in their notion that suggests the body coheres only to fall apart. The body can only become strong as it approaches proximity with the forces of its decomposition. Referring to this spectacle, Greenberg voices, "I'd always been extremely meticulous about how that deterioration was aestheticized through the use of makeup, contact lenses, and scenography. This was my first time making an artwork without the visual veneer acting as a barrier between the audience and my body. I feel my black body being consumed every day. I'm within my comfort zone as long as I have agency over the poetics of that consumption. But here, I wanted to let go of that, just to see what would happen. This is real physical pain. It always is. But this time, the pain isn't wrapped up in a metaphor or delivered to you as a poem. It is a specimen. My greatest discovery during this process is that specimens are poetry too. And I come by both approaches honestly and still firmly believe that the fantastical to be just as true as the mundane. Just as I think that in my practice, the reality of the black existence needs more space right now than the imaginary." Through the reading of these two queer durational performance practitioners, despite recognizing their difference in artistic objectives, I conclude that both artists project the ideas of decomposition and consumption onto the materiality of the flesh through the body's capacity as a mean to realize their aims. These ideas of decompositions are found in both artists' work, where extremes of physical and mental endurances are placed upon the body's material capacity to create a spectacle of bodily deterioration, with ideas of consumption being projected through modes of capitalism and oppression. Where these artists differ in their political sphere, Cassill's has developed refined techniques to make relevant and politically charged duration performances, whereas Greenberg engages his audience beyond direct narratives of oppression through the romanticized black body. What both artists accomplish through durational performance and the body's capacity is the centering of the body as a valuable site of knowledge, possibility, and intersubjective exchange. They consider the body as a site of creative resistance that is able to wrest itself from neoliberal structure of control that permeates aesthetic consciousness and artistic production, whilst their artistic compulsion to bring attention to the materiality of the human body and to test its limits exposes a larger choreography of power at work in everyday life. Durational performance is imbued with queerness that presents us with a radical restructuring of time and activity. The queer body cultivates its precarity to recuperate the body from a society that is structured to produce pain. And through the queer body's capacity, we see durational performance emerge as a queer medium, rooted in queer and feminist tactics, challenging encounters with otherness. This places the cultural value on this medium, its queer and POC practitioners, and their unique aesthetic devices that broaden our historiographies and center the queer and POC body. Thank you everyone for listening to my presentation.